Would you ever choose to travel for work by train instead of plane? Last week, I did just that when I took the Amtrak Wolverine from Chicago to Detroit and back for a work trip. In this video, I'm sharing why I chose to take the train instead of flying or driving, the key things to know about logistics, and what to expect if you are considering taking a similar trip. Let's start with why you might consider taking the train instead of flying or driving. I'll tell you why I did. We've likely all been hearing about the bit of chaos happening at airports in the US these days, and so that was the first sort of idea in my mind when I set out to consider booking travel for this work trip. Chicago to Detroit is generally a pretty short flight, but when you add in increasingly long airport wait times to go through security, add in even getting to the airport, then waiting for boarding, then sitting on the plane and getting off, and the destination where I was going to within Detroit is an hour away from the Detroit airport versus only about a 20-minute drive from Detroit Amtrak. So even though the train journey was technically longer than taking a quick flight, I don't know how quick that flight would have been given all of the ways of moving through both airports to be able to actually get from Chicago to Detroit. So I thought, let's take the train because it may be longer, but it'll be a longer period of time that is uninterrupted. Don't have to go through security, don't have to have a super long boarding process. Things won't be as choppy as going through security, waiting, standing in the boarding line and waiting, getting on the plane, waiting to disembark. It's just get on the train, sit in one place for your entire journey, which allowed me more time to focus on getting work done, resting, reading, whatever it is that I wanted to do. Another factor I considered is my money would go further on the train. I was able to book myself in the quieter, more comfortable business class cabin of the Amtrak Wolverine for about the same amount that I would have spent on a round trip flight in the most basic level of economy. And overall, I expected to just feel more comfortable on the train, have more space, have better scenery and views throughout. Since I traveled in business class this trip, and I have previously traveled in coach class on Amtrak from Chicago to Ann Arbor, let's do a quick comparison. Is Amtrak business class worth it? The truth is, it depends. The reason I chose the business class cabin was because I wanted one of those single side seats where it's just one seat next to a window and there's no other seat next to me for someone to sit directly by me. I wanted the additional space and I wanted the seats that looked a little bit more comfortable for my longer train ride. I also assumed and expected that it would be quieter in business class and I would be able to focus more on getting some work done or getting some reading for work done. Plus, because the business class cabin is all the way at one end of the train, there really weren't that many people walking back and forth through it, which I think contributed to the quietness. Depending on what Amtrak line you book, business class also lets you reserve a specific seat. And I'll be honest, I thought that was going to be another one of the perks that I was granted, and it also factored into me choosing Amtrak business class. But when I went to book my ticket, I did not have the option to reserve my seat, and I emailed the customer service, and apparently Amtrak Wolverine does not give you that option. So something to keep in mind is if you care about where you're sitting, you will want to arrive early enough to be able to have first pick of your seat. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into logistics, but coming back to business class, something else to note is that in the business class cabin, at the very front, when you enter the cabin, there is a small section that only has coach seating. If you've bought a business class ticket, you cannot sit in those seats. I saw several people get redirected to choose a business class seat. If you have a coach ticket, you could be sitting in the business class cabin in one of those seats. So some of the pros that I mentioned around having a quieter cabin and maybe things feeling a little bit more spacious could be achieved if you manage to snag a coach seat in the business class cabin. So in that sense, it might not be worth it to get a business class ticket. Also, in general, when I walked through the train to get to the cafe cart all the way on the other end of the train from where the business class cabin was, it honestly didn't seem that loud or crowded. Now, I was traveling on weekdays. I traveled on a Monday and then I traveled back from Detroit on a Thursday. So maybe if you are traveling at a time that's not super busy, if you are going during the week, you could still have a quiet, comfortable, somewhat solitary experience in coach. And so in that case, business class might not be worth it. Another thing to note about business class is that at least in Chicago Union Station, when you get in, there is a separate waiting area for you if you have a business class ticket. I did not really spend any time in there because by the time I got there, they said, all right, business class is now boarding. We did get to board first. I am glad that I was there about 30 to 45 minutes early at the station. And so as soon as we got on, I got first pick of the seat that I wanted. If you have a business class ticket, you also get unlimited free coffee and tea on board, but you do have to wait for the cafe cart to open. I had to wait about half an hour for the cafe cart to open. My train ride started at 6:45 a.m. So that was a little bit of a struggle, but it was okay. And you also get one premium beverage free. So on the way there, I just got a water bottle. On the way back, I got a La Colombe vanilla draft latte. Let's talk about some of the logistics to consider when you are booking your tickets and then once you actually arrive at the station of departure. Generally, you want to try to book your tickets as far in advance as you can for the best prices. I ended up booking my tickets about 2 weeks before my travel dates, but in the future I would try to do even earlier if I could. It's typically recommended that you arrive 30 minutes before your train's departure time. I don't travel by Amtrak very often, and so I know that Chicago Union Station is big. It had been about a year since I had taken the Amtrak from there, so I allotted myself 45 minutes. I arrived at the station around 6 in the morning. I briefly considered finding a place to get coffee, but I resisted for a couple of reasons. One, not many things were open that early at the station in my immediate vicinity. As I was walking around, I heard them call for business class ticket holders to get settled into the waiting area, and then soon after that we were boarding. So I really didn't have much time. Plus, I was carrying a rolling suitcase and a off-the-shoulder bag. That didn't leave me much space to walk around with a giant cup of coffee, which is what I was craving. So I would say if you are in a station, especially where a journey is starting, like Chicago was the start of the journey for this train, then err on the side of arriving earlier. On the flip side, when I was traveling back on Thursday from Detroit to Chicago, that is a much smaller station. There's really just one big room where everyone waits together. It's a little chilly. It's not the most comfortable. I arrived way too early there. I arrived probably 45 minutes early there, if not even a little bit more. And I had my book and I sat there and read. I'm currently reading the Throne of Glass series, but I definitely could have taken my time and arrived maybe 20 minutes before boarding time, because there they all walk up, everyone walks up together to the platform to board about 5 minutes before the train is set to arrive. I walked over to the very end where I knew the business class cabin would likely be, because that's where I had gotten off when I arrived in Detroit. I got on, I got my solo single seat again, luckily, and I was good to go. As far as what to pack, you will want to look at what is allowed based on your ticket and your train line type, but generally speaking, you can get away with a lot more on the train than on the plane. I brought a carry-on sized rolling suitcase as well as a sort of large work bag, kind of like a tote that I have, and that's it. You do also have the option on some lines to check some luggage if you need it, and you certainly, I believe, can bring more luggage than I actually did. That's just all I needed for a couple days of a work trip. Now let's talk about the onboard experience. Honestly, compared to flying in economy, taking the train, especially the business class cabin, feels like a little bit of a luxury. Right under one of the armrests, you have a couple of outlets to use. There's plenty of legroom and space and a nice big desk area that you can snack on or work on. I did both. The bathrooms are, of course, much more spacious than they would be on an airplane. Still not somewhere that you'd want to spend a lot of time. They're not the cleanest or the nicest looking, but they are so easy to just get up and pop in and out of as often as you need. There's just so much space to be able to walk around and stretch your legs if you need to. The views were beautiful. And yeah, you know, the journey did feel long, okay? how long is it? It's over 5 hours to go from Chicago to Detroit by train. But like I said earlier, that is uninterrupted time. So once I'm on the train, I have that full amount of time to do it as I please. Get into flow mode on work. I can take an uninterrupted nap. I can read my book. I also had shows downloaded on Netflix on my phone. So I just hung out and had a fine time. There is a cafe cart on board, like I mentioned. I only went there for coffee, really, and I brought my own snacks each way. You don't have to do that, but just know prices are more like airport or movie theater prices for snacks. And for me personally, I just am trying to be really intentional about how I eat and trying to stick to healthier options. I just preferred to have my own snacks packed. The views were also so beautiful. There's no fighting for the window because there are nice big windows, and so you can pretty easily look around and get a beautiful view out. Personally, I think there are a lot of pros to train travel. I also talked about the beneficial impact of train travel versus plane travel in my previous video that you can check out here on sustainable travel tips. But let's also talk about a couple of the cons. So of course, like I mentioned, it does take longer in theory because it's a 5 or 6 hour journey between Chicago and Detroit by train. It's about the same, but maybe a little bit less if you were to drive. I don't enjoy driving, and I would rather have someone else take the wheel while I'm able to lounge and sleep or watch TV or read or work or do whatever I need to. And it's about a 1 hour to 1.5 hour flight from Chicago to Detroit. But like I said, that doesn't include the time to and from the airport, through security, waiting for boarding, all of that. Now, I will say on my way back on Thursday from Detroit to Chicago, I was so tired, so energetically drained from the work that I had been there to do, which I loved, but it was draining, that I had a moment where I was like, maybe it would have been better to fly, but I think I just was tired and I was going to be tired regardless, and the train was probably still the better option in the end. Other thing to consider though, the potential con that did run through my mind a couple times is that trains don't run as frequently as flights do. So I did have a moment where I thought, what happens if for some reason my train gets canceled? I would have to find availability on the next train, and I think there were only 3 trains from Chicago to Detroit that day, and they were very spread out, and this is a longer journey. So it's like if I left at 6:45, I arrived in Detroit around 1:30, which was fine. I had the whole afternoon, and luckily for me, all went according to plan. But if that hadn't worked out, I think I would have had to take some sort of afternoon train, and that would have gotten me there well after dark. I had meetings planned to attend. It would have made me much more tired to jump into work the next day, which I was in on mode immediately the next day, versus with the plane, sometimes that's less of an issue because they can quickly board you on the next available flight in an ideal perfect world when airports are running at their ideal capacity, which might not be the case these days. So that's just something to consider. I haven't experienced it myself, so I don't know, but it was just a what if thought running through my mind. Ultimately, it was not only more comfortable, but also pretty fun and a fun little experiment for me to travel by train for work instead of by plane. I did previously consider doing this when I traveled to Minneapolis for work, but I didn't end up doing that at that time, and who knows, if that opportunity comes up again in the future, maybe I would consider it. For now, I'm really glad I did this, and if you're considering taking the train from Chicago to Detroit, whether for work or for fun, I highly encourage you to do it. It's a pretty fun experience and quite comfortable. If you found this video helpful or interesting, then please like and subscribe for more travel tips coming up in the future.